Hello, everyone. Would you like to boost your performance, increase your focus, and restore your energy levels? Supercharge your energy and improve your cell health with the wellness company's MitoSupport formula developed by experts like Dr. Peter McCullough. MitoSupport formula contains 5 incredible ingredients, including D-ribose and PPQ. Best of all, it's vegan, gluten-free, and made right here in the USA, so you know you can trust it. Buying American-made naturalistic ingredients of this quality separately costs almost $110. Our formula is only $84.99. Get MitoSupport today by going to twc.health. Listeners use the code Karis at checkout for an additional discount. Go to twc.health, promo code Karis, Karis, and get the energy and focus you and your family deserves. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Caris Project Updates. Keisha here, and today I have some very important news to share with you. So as many of you guys know, for the last 4 years, my father, Dale Richardson, and I have been exposing the improper contagion mitigation procedures for the COVID pandemic. My father, Dale Richardson, is a mechanical engineer, and I myself worked for the provincial government in Saskatchewan, Canada at a maximum security prison and hospital for the criminally and mentally insane. And although I was raised in Calgary, Alberta, I was actually born in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And you'll find out why Winnipeg is important later on in the video. Now, back to the updates. So, a petition for redress of grievances have been submitted with the Law Clerk of Alberta's Legislative Assembly. This needs to be heard as soon as humanly possible. Now you might be asking yourself, Keisha, why? What is that? What are you talking about? Well, I'm glad you asked. So the reason why this is so important is because it demonstrates constitutional violations of the RCMP operating within the province of Alberta without any law in force, and likewise concealing the delivery system created by the CDC and given to the PHAC, the Public Health Agency of Canada, for the biological weapons handed over to the Chinese at the Winnipeg Biolab. So now that the petition has been submitted, we're calling on all Albertans to file letters, information, and petitions to all of their MLAs and to every official to hold them accountable for the crimes contained in the documents. I need you to remember that all 87 of the MLAs have an obligation to bring this petition to the floor. The petition outlines the corruption of the RCMP concealing high treason in Canada and treason against the United States. As a resident of Texas myself, I understand why it's so important to call on the Americans, specifically the residents of the state of Texas and Michigan, to bring forward the petition for redress of grievances that has the evidence of the delivery system given to the PHAC by the CDC in order to interfere with the 2020 election and install Biden. Right now, we need to call on both countries and work together as a team. A house divided cannot stand. Right now, division is what's necessary for us to break and fall. We need to be united in this front, and we need to work together in order to create the unity that this country needs. And although we need both Canada and the United States to work together to create this common goal of God, family, and unity, I'm going to call on Alberta to lead the charge. Speaking of leading to charge, I will leave with my favorite quote. It reads, "The greatest want of the world is the want of men, men who will not be bought or sold, men who in their inmost souls are true and honest, men who do not fear to call sin by its right name, men whose conscience is as true to duty as the needle to the pole, and men who will stand for the right, though the heavens may fall." So my friends, who of you will stand with the Caris Project for the right, though the heavens may fall? Ciao.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Caris Project podcast. Today we have with us, obviously, my daughter is the host, and I'm the co-host. And we have with us Gavin Sorochin, who is he interviewed me actually before a few months back, but now he is deciding to throw his hat into the mayoral race coming up in Calgary. That will be quite about 15 months from now or so. But we're going to discuss some of his decisions to put his hat in the ring and what he plans to do with that. So, if you want to give us a little bit about yourself and what makes you decide to jump in the race now.
Sure. Nice to meet you, Dale, or nice to see you again, Dale, and nice to meet you, Keisha. We have not met, and so it's my pleasure. Well, I've been a musician my entire life. I've traveled the world, and I've played with, some great musicians, great artists. And I was having a conversation with a fellow artist today, and we were talking about, the fact that the artist, in some respects, the artistic class is kind of the canary in the coal mine. I mean, we tend to see the degradation in society and economics and things like this, even before the general public necessarily gets a hold of it, because we are part of what has now become what's called a gig economy. And anything prior to COVID, gig economy, well, those two words were never used, but the gig was always applied to the artist. It was never applied to general society or to, Uber drivers or these kinds of things. It was distinctly the artistic class. And so we were talking about that, over the last 35 years, really. And even if you go back to Frank Zappa in the mid 60s, he started to see the decline in the music industry. And the fact that, number one, it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. And number two, this sort of, capitalistic overarching of the culture of culture creation was not necessarily the best rubric that one could use when it comes to creating culture. And so even since 65, 66, all the way up till today, all we've seen is a decline. And of course, COVID was probably the top of the arc in this case for most artists. And that got me thinking pretty hard about my own existential crises and those of my brothers and sisters. And before that, I was doing a podcast, just an interview podcast, and interviewing a lot of the great curated, artists in this city. And because other installations weren't really doing the job that I felt they should be doing, like National Music Center, Arts Commons, places like this, these sort of, what would you call them, monuments to the managerial class, weren't doing anything. And our brothers and sisters were getting lost. And through COVID, there were a lot of individuals, great musicians and artists that died, and nobody was really taking a look at that. And so I applied that understanding to a greater understanding of what now we seem to be feeling in our general societies and cultures. And it's not that dissimilar from what the artist started to recognize 30, 40 years ago. And so that's what started me. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Well, yeah, and I mean, like, at the end of the day, I think it's time that we start taking a good look at our elections and our politics like we've never seen before, because we have had an unprecedented level of, I mean, I don't even know what to say. I don't even know what to call this anymore, right? Of mismanagement, corruption, you name it, in our government. So we want to make sure that our government is fundamentally changed. And I noticed that you had on your platform there, on the different things that you wanted to do, was one of the things was engaging with people, because especially these last 4 years, people were cut off from their government. I remember growing up in Manitoba where I could just stroll into the Legislative Assembly building and walk in and go in and see the minister's office without an appointment, right? And
Sure.
a cabinet minister, like, I could just stroll into his office at the legislative building you can't do that now. Like, there's security, they don't want to let you in, you're cut off, and all of these things. And that needs to fundamentally change.
Of course. I think what you're talking about is a misunderstanding or education toward what politics is. And politics, as far as I can understand it, is more about the people, and it has more agency from the people than the people understand. So, the mayoralship, if I can say it that way, really, when you boil it down, it's nothing more than a glorified mascot in a sense, right? And so what we have right now is somebody basically wearing a chicken suit, not coming out of City Hall, not engaging with the people, shutting down, proper discourse, not, when she stopped the individuals from protesting outside of City Hall or within a certain boundary line. And she never picked up the mantle to actually have the conversation with those two disparaging groups. I thought that's a miscarriage of your duty as a mayor. If you feel like you need to keep people away from City Hall, you should be absolutely conversing with them and dialoguing with them and having a town hall with them and going back and forth and saying, look, like, we want to bring people together, not separate them and not, toss them apart. I don't think there's ever been a more important time, at least in my history, where people need to come together. We are divided, and of course that's that goes without saying. But we need to come together, and we need to start having tough conversations. The mayoralship and governance, in a sense, is very simple in its construction, or in terms of what one should do while they're in politics. And basically that is take only the money that you need in order to survive and not necessarily thrive, do the will of the people, and get out. It's very simple. And yet somehow we've conflated that simple definition into things that don't exist. And I think we put politicians and people like this on a pedestal, number one, that I don't think the human race needs to be put on, and certainly the politician doesn't need to be put on. So celebrity has no place in politics, and yet for some reason it seems to. And I understand celebrity. I was engaged in it for 30 years. So it's a very simple thing of getting to know the people, gaining the trust of the people, staying accountable to the people, staying accessible to the people, and basically doing what they tell you to do. It's very simple.
Well, and you're a public servant. A public servant is a job. It's a function. You don't have rights. You have a job description, and it's to serve your people, not lord over them. But somehow people think that this is the way, and you have the mayors, or it doesn't matter whether you're a mayor, you're a premier or MLA or an MP or whatever, or representative in the states or whatever. People are getting cut off from their politicians here, so more in Canada, where there's been such a huge shift in being cut off and separated, and that you're getting the suppression. You're watching policies that are being put in place, and people can't get the adequate time to go in and speak and voice their opinions about them. And then there's this control of the narrative, which where dissenting voices are silenced, which is what we shouldn't have in politics, because you're supposed to have open debate when you're going to pass laws and all of these types of things. So you want to kind of touch on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, basically it goes back to what I've already said. I mean, I am, politicians themselves, people within the political sphere, just need to be accessible. There should be no firewall between the individual and the politician. If there is any firewall, it should be the other way around. The fact that we have our rights and and our freedoms, and that the politicians, in so much as their job description, should always be open and accountable. And it almost seems like the demos, or the people, the proletariat, are the ones now that are being held accountable for things that they're not accountable for, which is very interesting. And once again, a flip of the general understanding of politicians. So yes, I mean, once again, it's so simple as to come down to accessibility of a political figure. And that person, once again, I say political figure, and it almost makes me feel, I don't know, it doesn't make me feel good. Because like you said, I'm a public servant. I just go out and I would talk to people or groups of people. I mean, one of the platforms that I'm standing on is to do town halls every 2 weeks, if that's possible. And if I can't be available, then someone, that is involved with the campaign, or someone that I know and trust, would take care of that. And that is to gather the entire city together, if that is the case, and to discuss, to dialogue, to debate, to get a little angry, to show some emotion. I mean, that's one of I think the dulling factors of liberalism that we have right now, is the fact that, you can't show emotion, you can't be angry, you can't do anything. You have to be this polite society, in which, in most cases where I've met polite society, they end up being the least polite of individuals I've ever met. And so it's all about, it's about that emotion. It's about getting upset. It's about rejoicing. It's about suffering, right? It's about the very few social contracts that we have as human beings. And I also believe that if we're going to move forward, we have to move back. We have to go back to that understanding of what we mean, brother and sister, one, man to man, woman to woman, and what that means in terms of our species being Homo sapien, and the fact that we're not different. I mean, we may look a little different, we may speak a little different, but fundamentally we are all the same, and we all have very few and yet important concerns. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I mean, there was a time where you could go to the politician or the public servant or whatever their job is, and you could give them a piece of your mind and say, well, I don't like what you're doing because this stinks, right? And they wouldn't come in there and they wouldn't be calling security for you. They wouldn't do that, because there was a general acceptance that if you did something dumb, somebody was going to come back and tell you, right? And obviously the guy's not reaching across the table to grab you or nothing, but you're like, well, what are you doing, right? Like, these are things that are reasonable. Like, people expect you to maintain a unnatural poise when someone's trying to basically murder you, right? Right. Because if you're taking away their food, their way of living, it may not be pulling the trigger to them, but if you have no place to live and no way to eat, you're certainly getting killed. It's just a slow death, right? Sure.
And perhaps maybe that's why government tries to hide, because they know the people are getting angry. They know the people aren't, that the government isn't living up to its social contract with the people. And so they have to hide out of fear of maybe they're the one that gets the damage, meaning the government. And so this is what I want to flip, because once again, this is an incorrect understanding of how government is supposed to work. I interviewed a lady downtown a couple of days ago, and she kept calling me sir. And I said, I really want you to stop doing that. I said, my name is Gavin. Because here's what you're saying by saying that, is that you believe that there is something about me that is beyond or above you and your nature. And that is simply incorrect. As a matter of fact, because I'm running for office, I should be calling you ma'am. But you should never call me sir. You should only call me the dude that needs to get the job done. And this is, once again, this is something that we need to come back to. It's a very simple understanding, but we have been, hypnotized, manipulated into believing a different and incorrect thing. I mean, once again, I wish I could make it more complex, but it simply is not complex. It's very simple. It's just me being accessible and at least listening to what you have to say and seeing if that can get done, and then reporting back to you whether or not that's potential, that has a possibility. And at the same time, the politicians that may be around me, holding them accountable to you. So in these town halls, if there are counselors that don't want to come out, well, they'll be recognized by the people. And I will recognize them straight away as individuals that don't want to come out and reckon with their public. So what is that? And what are you going to do about that? That's the other thing too. People believe that politicians are the ones with the power. And yes, they have usurped a lot of it. But ultimately, the people are the ones with power. So if I come out and I tell you that Counselor X, Y, or Z he's too afraid to show his face or her face, then I ask the people, the public, what are you going to do about it? You have the power here. I can't get rid of him. I'm only one of several votes, but you can throw him out immediately. So what are you going to do? And that brings the power back to the individual. And they start to see, oh my God, I really do have power. Right? Now there's more than that, but I'll stop there. Yeah.
But if we didn't have power, they wouldn't be taking such efforts to keep us quiet and to cut ourselves off from being able to ask them questions, right? Like,
sure.
we all see what happens with Trudeau every time he goes anywhere now, right? Like, he has to spend a lot of our tax dollars getting increased security because people tell them exactly what they think, right? And by all means, if you're going to be doing these things to people, then they have the right to tell you that they don't like what they're doing, and they have the right to tell you that we don't want you here anymore because you're not doing the job, and they actually have the right to remove you and get someone else to do this. And so a lot of the people that are even in their own constituents who are not, for example, allowing him to survive all of these no confidence motion, I'm sure that their constituents do not feel the same way as they do, these guys that are supporting them. So they're going against the will of their people, because when people don't have food to eat, right, they're losing their shelter. They can't do all the things that they need to do. They're getting all this I guess technical difficulties.
We lost, I guess, the guy.
Yes, you're having all of these issues. Who wants that to happen, right? Like, I mean, nobody. I don't care what party you're in. Everybody wants bread to eat. They want their families to be fed. They want to have law enforcement protect them, because they don't want to have anybody just being able to come in and commit crimes with them at will. So everybody wants that. Nobody wants people harming their children or any of that stuff. So this is not a party issue. So if people are making it harder for you to live your life, you have a right to tell them. And that's really what the bottom line is. And this is what we need, is to have that accountability back, right? And that accessibility, so that you can get a pulse of what you're doing when you're doing your job. It seems like people don't want to know how they're doing in their jobs, is why we're getting cut off. Just, if you want to add to that, thanks for, see you guys some technical difficulties.
Yeah, I don't know. It just did bang. I was out. You know, it was like a magic trick. So I just quickly jumped back in. Yeah, man. Well, once again, I mean, it comes back to very simple things. And that is just the accessibility and the accountability and the living amongst each other with an understanding that we are all just human beings, and I'm doing the job that I'm doing, and you're doing the job that you're doing. And there is respect across the board for all individuals that do whatever job they do. Politics is not a glorified, or shouldn't be a glorified position. As a matter of fact, I find it hard-pressed, even as an artist, to find any discipline that should deserve that high praise. Even the artists themselves. I think that, I've always said that Paul McCartney I'm not sure that he's worth $1 billion to all the brothers and sisters that I know that are worth next to nothing. I don't know if that's quite true, except in terms of the marketplace and how fortunate he began. But in terms of his curation or his mastery, I know cats locally that blow a lot of people that we determine as masters away. So once again, it comes back to humanity. This is something I think we're coming back to, is this sense of humanity, the sense that every person matters, every person needs to belong, and we need to do a far greater job of living up to the promises. And this is why I'm very careful about promises. I'm talking to this lady that I interviewed last week, along with me and another friend, are trying to get her into Calgary housing. We're trying not to promise too much because expectation is a killer, but at the same time, we want to give her hope. And so I'm hoping that we're only a few months away from what she was told would take her years, and that by a bureaucracy that is not doing its job. Man, this shouldn't take 7 years for her to get a one-bedroom apartment and a cat, right?
7 years?
7 years, dude. 7 years. This should take a few months. And like I said, I just got off the phone with the individual that's helping me in this situation. And she's given me horrific stories about people that are being turned away in their 60s and 70s, and that there is a giant chasm between the bureaucratic foundations that are set for this type of person and this type of person, and in the middle is this hell that people are just falling into left, right, and center that can't get the help they need. It's like a conveyor belt. These people are just dropping like flies. And that's just incorrect. That's bad government.
Well, because they create some arbitrary standards and so forth that are unrealistic. And now with the way that the inflation's gone through the roof, they still have pretty much the same standards, or they might adjust them incorrectly. So a lot of people will fall into an area where they can't get help, but they need help, and then they just get pushed into worse situations. And this is where we end up, they're using these rigid policies and so forth, and using bureaucracy, which should never even be part of our government in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got all these bureaucracies that come in there and they have all their policies and all their different this and that. And they use this more than dealing with the individual in a case-by-case basis, which we really need to start going back to that and getting, slashing the amount of government. Because if we did that, we would have less problems.
I'll give you an example of this, a story of this. One of my friends, a musician here in town, was working in Vancouver, and you want to talk about pork pie spending. So basically what they were doing, what the government was doing, was that for each needle you retrieved from the public, you would get a certain amount of money for that. Now, because my buddy's kind of an entrepreneur, he thought, well, where can I go where I can get all the needles, where I can get just more needles? So he started going to vet clinics, and he started bringing in this entire cache of needles, of used needles. Now, I'm not sure why you would ever get money back per needle. I'm not even sure what that's about, whether it's recycling or I can't even begin to imagine. But this guy was starting to make hand over fist from the government. He stopped it because he finally realized, I'm basically screwing people out of their money, and money that I shouldn't be getting in the first place. So this kind of spending, instead of taking this money and spending it on a holistic approach, to the understanding of the psychology of the addict and, the direct needs of the addict, and dealing with the addiction, this whole overarching approach that someone like Gabor Mate would propose. And what's interesting is the government doesn't even listen to these professionals, whether it's Gabor Mate or what's his name, the prof in Toronto.
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson. They don't enlist them. Instead, they vilify them, and and basically take them for retraining, which is kind of a hint at 1984, I think. But they should be enlisting these people to solve the problem, and they're not. So, it is my desire, as I get closer to what I'm attempting to achieve here, to have conversations with Gabor Mate, Jordan Peterson, and other, political pundits that I really respect, and a lot of those from the States, just to get an understanding of how we could solve problems, how we could move 1 inch closer to solving even one problem. And so, once again, it comes back, it's quite simple. It's not a complex rubric here. It's about listening to people, and it's about figuring out whether or not their problem can be solved in real time. And if it can't, figuring out why that problem can't be solved. What is standing in the way of solving that problem? And if it's people and agencies and bureaucracies, well, then you got to call that out, and you got to make the people upset about that. So,
yes.
Yeah, it's the agency of the people. It's for me to be honest, and it's for the people to act.
Well, yes, and I have to question whether or not when somebody says that they don't want to have any accountability or shielding government from accountability, I have to question that, because everybody should have a right to question their government, right? And if you're seeing something that you don't like, you should be able to question them. Suppressing open questions is a bad thing, because people are like, oh, well, you've got to toe the party line. No, you don't. Because if your party's oppressing you and harming the people, why would you support that? Right?
Right. Sure. It's the most interesting thing that those, I could talk about being a musician, going into a studio and not being held accountable for how I play. That's one thing, which is ridiculous and ludicrous. But an institution that has the responsibility of the people in their hands and making decisions, they can't be questioned. That is the most ridiculous thing to me I've ever heard. It doesn't matter to me whether you say I'm doing great or I'm doing bad. I've been a musician long enough, and I've heard people say you suck on enough occasions to have a skin about that, to have a thick skin where that's concerned. I can take it because it always made me better at my job. So people say, Gavin, we're not going to hire you for this session because, your time's bad, or you can't follow a metronome. And I go, man, I need to work on that. And that's only made me better. The feedback from people, especially when they tell me I'm not cutting it, has always been the most beneficial moments of my life.
Well, if somebody doesn't tell you you're doing wrong, and then you can't fix it, right? Mm-hmm. Like I always had the saying that the road to hell is paved with yes men. Because if people are telling you that you're doing great all the time when you're not, you're bound for a train wreck real quickly. Right? This is how you get into problems. The people around you should be saying, hey, you know what? You're not doing a good job. And so how do you fix it? And no different with government. So when I look at people that are coming around and restricting people from venting and their opinions, this is where I'm sitting down and saying, you're not here on the side of freedom. Because if people are being oppressed and they're not being able to speak, this is why we have freedom of speech, right? Like, so that people can sit down and say, look, there's something going on. But when people are not allowed to speak, how do you know it's not going on? Right? You're seeing a lot of this mob mentality. We're seeing a lot of this like 1984 type thing, where there's a lot of restriction on what people can say, and that needs to stop, right? Like we're seeing it everywhere. Want to touch on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that goes back to being an artist too, right? Is your freedom of expression. You need to be able to express yourself, and you need to be able to do that in a way that is not monitored and only has, that the artist has the best intention when they're expressing themselves. And so if you try to shut down expression of any kind, and, I mean, Germany, we have some things that we can take from Germany. And one of those is, the freedom of expression and art. All that got centralized and moved into one direction for a political purpose. And those who couldn't express themselves were vilified. Ultimately, some of them or a lot of them were killed. That is a great example to take into the future. And yet somehow we find ourselves back in, something that at least rhymes with that. And we don't even recognize it, or we don't want to recognize it. I use words like stupidity and words like that as willful actions, because I think that people can know, and I think a lot of people want to know, but they're either too busy or it's going to disrupt their own psychology to the point where they may have to fix something in their own lives and they don't want to address that. It could have a spiritual component as to where, people don't want to know, what I mean? Like how to better themselves and what they could maybe do in their own lives, that could make them better. So if you shut down discourse and you tell everybody that if anybody's overweight, you're just big boned, or, you're fat shaming somebody. I mean, I don't know. I don't even know what the hell that means. Or ageism. I mean, you have to just be able to say, Joe Biden is too old. And he's old because he's showing signs of age. I'm not an ageist, whatever the hell that means. I don't even understand the terminology. 10 years ago, we could have just said, man, that dude's old, and nobody would have cared. It's this whole restriction and curtailing of language and free speech and self-expression, brother. You know what I mean? I want to be able to express myself. And I've learned that so much in art, and it should be no different in society.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you're not committing a crime, by all means, say what you want, right? Like, and if somebody doesn't like it, they'll say something back to you. This is fundamentally the people kind of sorted things out. There was that consequence. You said something stupid, somebody would or a few people might, straighten you out, and that would really be it. But now this is not the case, right? We're seeing all of this stuff where there's our technical difficulties is getting sorted out. But I mean, before that, this would get straightened out. People would discuss it, and that would be it. But now we're seeing such a restriction on language, which is, if you take away your freedom of speech, your freedom of expression, you've taken away civil and religious liberty. Because how do you communicate any of that stuff? With words. So if you can't speak, how can you sit down and say, well, my religious liberties are being infringed or my civil liberties are being infringed? You can't, because they're restricting your ability to speak about these things.
Right.
So when I see that suppression, that's where I look at, that is like the beginning of tyranny. So if you're taking away somebody's ability to speak, you're a tyrant. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, because that's the first thing that people will come up and say is that you're doing something wrong, right? And there's no ability to do this. So we see this fundamentally, and if you don't do this, then people get pushed further and further, which is kind of like what we're seeing. It looks like people are trying to push things to a boiling point, even with what's going on here just this weekend, right?
Yes.
Like where you're watching one side pushing the other side to an extreme, and you're watching that one side has getting a complete denial of rights until now you're seeing like government agencies with a complete breakdown, and where it's so bad that it's impossible to sit down and say that this was incompetence, where they go in and shoot a president in broad daylight in such an egregious manner, and then try and gaslight the public.
Well, yeah, I've thought for a while now, and I've used this terminology, you know, in the social contract that I've written and things like this, that we're coming to an event horizon. You know, there is something, whether or not we're moving through into a new epoch in, you know, in the furtherance of our planet, a new type of civilization, whatever you want to call it. I really feel that we're on the cusp of something really important. And I know that all through history that's been said, but all of history didn't have nuclear weapons, you know, and all of history didn't have certain elements of what we're suffering or contending with today. And so I really feel like we're at a certain point, you know, just back to the co-optation of language and things like that. I think the first time I ever really noticed it was when they started calling people that worked at Subway sandwich artists. And I was like, no, you're a dude that makes a sandwich.
Yes.
You're not an artist, and don't fool yourself. You're being fooled. You're being lied to. If you want to be an artist, that's one thing. Go do what you love. But you're not an artist. And there's no such thing as a sandwich artist unless you make, I don't know, maybe a Picasso out of the salami or something. You know, otherwise, dude, you're just making me lunch. That's all that is, you know? So I found that very strange. And if you take that out to its illogical conclusion, what you find is what we have today, right? We are so manipulated. We are so turned on our head. And it's such a psychological, you know, I don't want to swear, but it's such a psychological problem in society. You know, Gabor Mate said, narcissism is more a strategy today than it is a mental illness. And I think he's right. You know, we are narcissistic for our gain, and we are all suffering that way. And I think COVID, although the initial moments of COVID were an opportunity for people to really gather together. You know, my neighbors met each other, came out. Of course, we were waving across the street, but we're like, hey, man, you know, like, nice to meet you. Nice to finally meet you. And then the vaccines came out and everything changed. All right. Now you're in one camp or you're in another. And that, you know, that division has lasted until today. But I do see hope. If I didn't see hope, man, I wouldn't be downtown talking to homeless people and businessmen and everything else, you know, trying to gauge the temperature of where they're at and what they feel they need, and trying once again to educate them, which is, I think, one of the biggest things I'm running on is the re-education of the mind, right? Is the fact that you are political. You don't have the luxury being born on planet Earth to say, I'm not political. The moment you stepped on this planet or fell out onto it, you became political. And you are political, and you can't get away from it. Nature itself or a God would never allow you to not engage in this respect. And secondly, you are the power. I am not. I will stand with you. I will stand beside you if I believe what you're doing is correct, and we will move in the same direction together. You see? It's a re-education of the mind, of the soul as well. And this has to do with the return of an artistic class or the reintroduction of true culture, because we don't have culture anymore. What we have is entertainment, and entertainment is not culture. Culture can inhabit entertainment. There could be entertainment within the bounds of culture, but it doesn't work the other way around. You can't create culture with entertainment. And the reason is because culture is created by the masses. And it lasts into antiquity because of that, because all hands are on deck for that, the creation of that culture, right? What you have with entertainment is what you see in National Music Center, or you see in Arts Commons now going to destroy Canada Olympic Plaza and put up, you know, a $270 million extension, every dime falling on the Calgary taxpayer, every dime. You see what I mean? So we have this, even in the arts, and especially in the arts, because the arts dictate a certain amount of culture. So now you have the arts dictating what people are going to think and what they're going to believe, and it's all centralized. And that is not the culture, the creation of culture. That is the creation of something else. I don't know what you would even call it, you know, a furtherance of oligarchy or autocracy. but you don't have culture and you don't have the will of the people. And I'll tell you what, if this planet is going to tarry, it's going to tarry because the people determine it, not the few. And that is my firm belief. And that's why I believe in you. You know, I wanted to say that to whatever extent that I can, I mean, I stand with what you and your daughter and your entire family are doing. And I stand with you to perhaps, you know, make it a safe place for your daughter to return and live her life with her dad. Because I think that's pretty important. And whether or not I can change that or I can do anything about it, I stand right beside you in what you are doing. Because all you're doing is what I'm trying to do, except I'm trying to tell people to hold me accountable and you're holding them accountable. It's the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is thank you. And I mean, this is where we need to come back as human beings, because we have to have checks and balances. This is just the way it is. Like, I grew up, we had consequences, right? And these are things, whether they're good or bad. And so you learn from, like, okay, I did that. That blew up in my face. Let's not do that again. Let's try this course of action that provides me a good consequence. And people navigate through life. We make mistakes. But as you get older, the mistakes should be not as catastrophic, right? Because you're like, okay, I've done it wrong enough times. Let's do it right. But this is kind of how we learn, right? Because we're not sticking our hands on the stove when we're 30, or at least we shouldn't be, right? You should have learned that when you were a kid trying to do it and you burnt it and you're like, okay, I'm never going to do that again, right? Like, so that's kind of what we should be doing. But we're seeing a complete breakdown of this and taking away consequences. Like, I mean, changing everything, and so much control, a few minds controlling a large amount of people and restricting what they're doing. And we need a lot of people to do a lot of things, because that's how you add to the richness of the human experience. But when you restrict this and make us all live in this area, and this is how you create misery and problems. We're supposed to be different, and then we get to go and experience different things, and seeing all the differences that we never thought were possible, that we're like, oh wow, that's cool, right? Like, and we want that. We want to see that.
It's all cool, man. Like, I've traveled the world, and whenever I travel, I always go to the most, in some places you might call them the most decrepit. Like when I was in Belize, I went to this hole-in-the-wall restaurant every time I was there, and I've been there 30 times. And I would sit with the locals, and I would talk with the locals, and I would say, tell me your stories, because it was so interesting. And what I found out is that they weren't on, psychotic medication, because they didn't have access to it, and they didn't have the money for it anyway, and they were happier than your average Canadian, and they had far less ability to gain even the necessities of life, but somehow they were happier. And it's a funny thing, as I talk, and people would say, well, Gavin, get to your point. I'm reiterating my point, and my point is very simple, and that is that people matter, that people are the reason the earth exists. We wouldn't need earth if we didn't have people, and so we have to be of some importance. And if we're that important to nature and a God itself, himself, herself, whatever you want to call it, then we're important. And the funny thing is that the average homeless person really understands what I'm saying. And the average proletariat or polite society has no clue what I'm talking about. And that's where it comes from. Hey, just give me your points. Give me your points. Brother, I'm telling you what my point is. My point is you matter, and you're not treating yourself like you do, and you're not being treated like you do. It's time for us all to gain this understanding of what we mean and what we don't mean. It's a paradox that you are altogether special and altogether not special. It is that paradox that we have to come to terms with if we're going to do anything. If I'm going to cut your taxes or whatever I'm going to do, it's going to have to come with a basic understanding that you matter and the homeless person matters. You see, and I think that this is the new epoch we're arriving at, is the point where there is this acknowledgement of the Homo sapiens species as one tremendous group of individuals inhabiting a planet. And once we understand that, we might be able to fix things like homelessness, right? Because we won't want so much rapacious capital for our mundane, for the mundane things we do, that we might actually be able to share the entire wealth that the entire world already has. I know that sounds romantic, might sound romantic, but it's true. It's just simply true.
This is where it comes down. Like, I mean, like, we were starting a podcast called Practical Christianity, and just things that are lost on people, like love your brothers yourself. Mm-hmm. If you don't want it for yourself, don't do it to someone else. Would you want to be thrown out on the street? Would you like to be treated like trash? Mm-hmm. No? Then don't do it to someone else. Like, I mean, these are common sense things that people have lost sight of. And that's because we've been following the herd, and the herd is being led by the Pied Piper instead of people with sense, right? Because the Piper was not here to be your friend. He promised, he probably created the problem and said he'd come and give you the solution to the problem, but then the price that you paid was not what you wanted, right? And so this is what we're really dealing with. And so we need to have sensible, return to sensibility and having like morals and values, and saying, okay, you know what, this is wrong, and being able to call wrong, not saying, well, if you do this, you hate somebody. No, right? I don't have to accept what you're doing. And if that person is doing something wrong, then I'm going to say they're doing something wrong. If they're breaking the law, then they should be punished. That's really it.
Yeah, right? It's pretty simple, isn't it? It's pretty simple, you know. There's risk involved here, right? Because we're still dealing with. I mean, if you take a look at the mayor now, right, her interests are very laser pointed in terms of commerce, and although I haven't been able to tie her specifically with any three-letter organization, you know, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, right? So. For me, there is no special interest. And I've already risked with my artistic brothers and sisters, because as much as artists have this ability to be, quite aware of their surroundings, they're very sensitive people. They also hate rocking the boat. And so I've had a lot of backlash from them. And I've called them out. And I'm going to keep calling them out, because they're not as correct as we know correct to be. There is a more correct way to live, and that's not becoming a superstar. That's really about creating, which once again is an odd duality that people, in the arts can't wait to be superstars, and yet they're basically homeless. So why wouldn't you just take the natural form of creation, being able to create, and have that the standard for your life, than becoming another Beyonce? Why wouldn't it just be enough that you could live your life creating and being part of a geography that is all about culture and all about, sustaining you as a human being and loving your work, and adding to that the element that once you become curated enough and once you become good enough, you're going to be noticed, and you're going to go out on behalf of this geography, and you're going to do greater things. Once again, these are, I don't want to sound romantic, but this is kind of what I'm building my platform on, is that we need to go back before we go forward. There are some things, like you said, Dale, that we need to learn, or relearn, or re-remember. And that is the very simple things in life, that life is preferable to death, and rejoicing is preferable to suffering, and the very few social contracts that we ever engaged in as a human species. And as we do those things, we can start from there. You talked about another thing. There's a great thought experiment that goes something along the lines of what you're talking about. If you took a class of individual, a young, let's say just young people, and you put them in pods and you shot them out into the universe because the earth was dying, let's say. It's a thought experiment. Just stick with me. And so within that, they came out of their pods or whatever, or their moms or whatever, and they learned everything they needed to learn, right? They all had great educations and everything else. But the one thing that they didn't have was they had no understanding of what their status or life would be. So they didn't know where they would factor into the different aspects of life. Would they be homeless? Would they be a rock star? Would they be, you see what I mean? But they would all be educated. And then they were all comported to sit down and figure out the society that they would want to live in, not knowing whether they would be homeless or the least person on earth or the greatest person on earth. How would you construct your society? And I think that's another conversation that we need to have, is what do we want to see our society as? And if we do have, the power and the agency to create that, then we should be conversing about that and talking about that and sitting down and really having those tough conversations, even going so far back as to strip ourselves of everything we possess and have that thought experiment right in front of us. What would we be if we were nothing? If all we had was an education and we had no ideas what the outcome might be in our lives, how would we create that society? I think it's a beautiful thought experiment. And the interesting thing is that the younger individuals out there are the ones most willing to have it.
Well, I mean, they pretty much are working for nothing anyway, right? Like,
well, they're working for no future, and they're certainly not making any money, and they're as scared as anybody.
Yeah, they have the most to lose, right? Because they're like my daughter's generation. They're watching all of these debts going through the roof, and they're like, I don't got no money. Like, I can't live to pay for this. Right. You
see the TikTok, videos, those girls, whether they're right or whether they're real or not, you see them sitting in their cars, bawling their eyes out about the fact that they have to go back to mom and dad's house, and they may never extricate themselves from that reality. And that's horrific. I mean, brother, you and I know, going back to, because I think we're probably of a similar age, you could still own a house, man. You could own a house. That wasn't silly. I just asked a few 16-year-olds a couple of days ago if they thought they'd own a house, and they laughed at me. And I'm like, man, that's different. That's really different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I remember coming out into like one of the worst recessions, right? Where people were like foregoing going to university or school just to go and take jobs at department stores and things like this because things were that bad. And this is way worse, right?
Oh, yeah.
People are like, they're like, oh, I did this and this. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But were the conditions like this? I'm like, this is the only time they had things like this was right before the Great Depression. And they still didn't have all of these other things that were going on as well. Like, the government wasn't actively trying to exterminate you and push like all of this wrong ideology in the schools and everything else like this. So this is like a completely different dumpster fire. It's like everything rolled up into one, and here you go, guys. This is what we're going to leave you with. And so,
I've asked one question of the artistic class, and that is, when I want you to answer one question for me. When is enough pain enough pain? Like, just to answer that for me simply, because we are the frog in the pot, now almost cooked, and we're still not incurring enough pain. So I would really love to know when enough is enough. Can you answer that for me? Because it may be that death comes before the answer comes. And I think that's very sad of us as a human species, that we don't engage until the very last moment. That's a very sad fact of us.
Well, I think that this is where we really need to start becoming more proactive instead of becoming reactive. And this is really where it is. And the people that are there to do stuff, we should get up and do stuff. And we can't, a lot of people are under this delusion that we need to get everybody up at the same time. That is absolutely nonsense. That's not necessary. In fact, think about it. Look at the trucker convoy, for example. It started with a few trucks, but then as it began, things began to roll. Other people began to join them until they had the longest convoy in the world, right?
Right.
So all we need to do is the people that are ready to do something, we need to start just doing what we're doing. But we need to get people to see it. And this is why we see so much suppression, especially in the media, because see what you're doing, what my daughter's doing, what I'm doing, and there's other people all around doing these things. We need to start showing people what they're doing so that people can know, okay, hey, well, I can go and work with that person because I can help out there, or I can work with that person because I can help out there, and we can all start gravitating to people that are doing something, and this is how you build a movement. But this is why we have to start working together and getting each other's stories out so that people can see what needs to be done, because a lot of people just don't have the options. They don't know what to do, and I keep seeing this over and over again. And so everybody has different skills, and we need all these different skills employed in all different places, because we didn't get here all by one method. We got here by a bunch of different methods. And this is where we need to start. People need to start. If somebody's doing something right, let people see what they're doing. Right? If they're doing something to help, let people see what you're doing. You don't have to like what they're doing. You don't have to agree with what they're doing. If they're not breaking the law, then let people see, because we're all different. We all have different tastes. We all have different interests and so forth. And each person is going to be able to reach people that you'll never be able to reach. And so we want to reach everybody, because we're all in this together, and we need to get people to do what needs to be done. And so this is why when it comes down to talking to people, I give anybody a spot to speak. As long as you want to speak, you get heard, because we're at a point where we're not getting the ability to speak anymore. And so we need to allow people to communicate, and then to see what's going on, because right now people need hope. They're worn out, they're tired, and they're being beaten. And what they need is hope and some direction and so forth. So I know that we're going to have to, we have some things here get going, and we've got a lot of stuff going on, which we will be coming and catching back up with you.
Yes.
I want to see how this mayoral race goes, because people need to start looking at the candidates and all these other things. When it comes to voting, you need to look at every person. I don't care who they are, because you need to look at what they're doing so that you can vote intelligently and find out what's going on. So before we go, we'll give you your platform. What do you want to say to people? What do you want to tell the people?
Well, basically, I just want to be redundant, because I want people to get this, especially, this sort of middle privileged class of individual that thinks that their life is still okay. And that is that, there's an understanding that is lacking in certain groups of individuals, because, well, whatever reason, they don't have to take the hero's journey. They're safe. They're okay. But the new epoch isn't going to be constructed around individualistic wants and desires and needs. Although there will be an element to that, it will be an understanding of the entire demos of all people's needs, desires, wants, and that in some ways those will be as important to us as our own needs and wants and desires are. You know, if I think about what I'm doing, it's, you know, it's an interesting thing. I have people come to my door, you know, like, do you want to vote for this lady and that lady, you know, this constituent or whatever? And I'm like, well, where are they? Number one, why are you here? Why aren't they here? I want to talk to them, not you. Number one. Number two, they go, well, she's really big on oil and gas. And I go, okay, well, that's maybe a nice fifth consideration. Is there anything that comes before oil and gas to you guys? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't know, people, me? Like, do I matter to her? Or is she just gaslighting me with, you know, oil and gas? Once again, it has to come back to the individual. It has to come back to the person, and to me asking you, what do you want? Right? And to try and met that out to the greatest degree that I can. You know, I suppose there's a little bit of a frustration with me that some people don't understand that, and yet the homeless class gets it immediately, and maybe because they just have great needs and they need them met. And I'm not promising anyone anything. What I am promising is to be there and to be accountable. And I'm promising you a conversation. I'm promising to sit down with you and listen to what your concern is and to see if that concern can be met. And if it can't, I still want to give you an answer as to why it can't, right? And I think that this is of the utmost importance, that if we're going to move forward, we need to move forward on a foundation. The foundations all around us have collapsed, and we are left wanting and needing to reconstruct, I think, from a ground level back up, what we mean to each other, what society means to each other. That's a hard sell, because everything that matters right now is money and power. But I think that far above money and power is the individual themselves. And they are the most important thing to me. They are the thing that I am taxed by God to love and to take care of. Not finances and not even the environment. I'm taxed to love my neighbor. You see what I mean? So what does that really mean? Well, it means listening to you. It means legitimately caring about what you have to say. It means that if I'm in any position of leadership, trying to find out whether your concern is something that can be met, why it can't, and giving you the respect as a human being to come back with some form of an answer, to continue to debate, for people to show their emotions and their to not be shut down from speaking their minds. These are the important things. These are the fundamentals of the human species. And we're not smart enough yet to say we've got that right. So I think that's what I'd say. Can I say I'm gonna cut your taxes by? No, I can't say that. As a matter of fact, here's an interesting thing, is that on the day that in 2022 that the City Hall raised their wage by 2.3%, the same day they raised Calgary taxes, the taxpayers' taxes by 8.7%. On the same day, they raised your taxes 8.7, and they took 2.3. I mean, man, if that isn't somebody like a mayor coming out to you and saying, "Look, this is what we're about to do. Do you feel screwed now, or what?" What are the people going to say? They're going to say, "You ain't doing that. You ain't going to do it." And that's, I guess, if I could promise anything, that's what I promise, to come out and say, this is how you're getting manipulated, screwed. This is why you pay so much in tax, and we have to stop doing these things to you. What are you going to do about you? How are you going to fix it? And I think that once you start giving people that kind of power, they'll feel good about that. Now, you have leadership and you have police so that people don't overextend their power and become violent and things like that, of course. But the power has to get back into the hands of the people. I am so passionate about this, I can't even begin to explain it, but I hope it shows on my face. I want people to have their power back.
What which are very good things, which I'll tell you right now, that makes you the enemy of the establishment. I will I'll gonna close here with a prayer, and then I'm gonna put something on before I turn it over to my daughter for some closing thoughts.
Sure.
Okay. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your love, grace, and mercy. And watch over Gavin as he goes to do his work that you've placed before him, and to raise the awareness and accountability and accessibility for the people, and to put the power back in the hands of the people, and help people to come together to do what's right and pleasing in your sight, to rebuild this country, rebuild the churches, rebuild our families, and have some peace and prosperity until we see you coming in the clouds. Be with us and bless us and help us that we can protect the children, is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
And before I do this, I'm going to throw this thing up because this is something from Christine Anderson that talks about the power of the people, and I think people should remember this when they feel like they can't do anything. And then, Keisha, I'll let you put your final thoughts.
And out of all of these movements, it is the Canadian truckers that stand out and shine brightest. Because it was the Canadian truckers, their boldness, their courage, their determination to stand up to their governments. And it was they who inspired so many others all over the world to finally come together and be determined to put a stop to governments tearing down the very foundation of our democracies. And the reason I'm telling you all of this is this. While I might have given hope to people, like I said, it's only half the story. Because the other part of the story is this. I too needed hope. I too needed to know that I am not the only one fighting this fight. We all needed this hope. We all did. And this is what you have given us. Hope. Hope that not all is lost yet. Hope that freedom and democracy can still be restored. And it is that hope that nurtures my strength and my determination to keep up fighting on my end of the bargain. Because it is not enough for a handful of MEPs to stand up and toggle this fight. It is not enough. We need you, the people, because you are so infinitely more powerful when it comes to convincing governments that they are not doing the right thing. So please, first of all, thank you for doing all of this, for paying us the strength we need to do our job here. But please stand up to your governments and follow the brave Canadian truckers' lead. They did exactly the right thing.
And we'll put it over to you, Keisha.
Yeah, thank you. As always, that video. I agree that, you know, it's the people that's important, and I agree with what Gavin said as well about loving people. I myself love people, not things. I could care less about things. I want to love the person and their mind and their heart and who they are, and show empathy and compassion, make them feel like their needs are not only important, but to know that they will be met, that something will be done about it. I'm not one who favors much words, because words sound nice until you're starving and you have no food and you're on the street, like those homeless people you were talking about, when they're out there in the cold and someone's sitting there stroking their ego, and it's sitting there like, okay, well, I'm still hungry. We as people have the power to affect a lot more change than we give ourselves credit for, and that starts with showing love than goes to just saying, and hearing people out is the first part. And if you're not the one that can make the difference, then direct them to the people who can. But it's about working together and staying united to do these things. So I really appreciate everything that you said there, Gavin, because I think people, loving people and showing that is so important. Really being there for the people, because it's not the government who has the most control. We, the people, are the government. We're the ones that decide how things go, and we decide how change is affected, and we hold those people accountable by our actions every day. The only way that they're going to move in the right direction is if we show them that that's what needs to happen, and that's what we want to happen. Everybody saw what we did there with the truckers' convoy, and it shook the entire world, because everybody knows how passive Canada is. And like Gavin said, a lot of the people that are very polite are not really so polite. Those people who like to police words and everything, they don't actually really care about you, and they'll do some of the most horrific and harrowing things to end you and unalive you and all these things. It's like, we don't care about people's approach, we care about who can get it done, and that's what's important. The world saw what Canada did there, and we need to keep doing. We can't just be that one man or one hit wonder. I guess that's what they call it in music, right? The one hit wonder. We can't be that way. We have to consistently keep going, because people right now are forgetting that we are short with time. We do not have time to sit around and lollygag and la-di-da-di-da, whatever. We need to be swift with our approach. We need to be efficient, effective. We need to be united, and we need to trust that we will get things done if we work together. Because at this point in time, we are really cutting it. We saw what happened with Trump the other day, and we see what's going on in Canada. And this is not the time for, slothing around. So, thank you everybody for your time and considerations. I really appreciate coming to listen. We look forward to hearing more from Gavin in the future. I would say sir, but you don't like that. I'm one of those people, the culprits that call everyone sir. I find it to be respectful, but Gavin, we look forward to having you on in the future. And if you guys would like to support some of the work that we're doing, go ahead. Well, first, we will have him linked in the description, his page, and all the other things where you can find him and connect with him if you'd like. And then if you guys support what we're doing so that we can continue in this fight, because some of you guys are a little bit too stuck, and that's fine. Let's go and do the work. But you can go to the QR code up in the corner there and buy some of the merchandise, or donate whatever the Holy Spirit advises you to do. That keeps us going. But thank you again for all that you both said, and for everybody's time and considerations. And to my dearest Karis, until we meet again.